What's going on, guys? So today we're going to talk a little bit about Vagabond. Now, if you don't know, I was doing volume by volume reviews of Vagabond on my channel quite a while back, but at the time that I was doing them, I was trying to get the channel more exposure because I was just starting to get noticed, and I realized that the Vagabond reviews were not doing the kind of views that the rest of the content on my channel was doing, and I'll be honest with you, at the time, I was kind of nervous about people losing interest in the channel and unsubscribing because I was just starting to get that kind of rise in a fan base, and I didn't want to screw up my chances on content that people didn't want to watch. In retrospect, looking back on it, I kind of wish I did continue Vagabond in that format, but I just didn't. So I went through and I read the entire manga by itself, and it became one of my favorite manga of all time. It is on my top 10 list. I believe I put it at number 5, but if I was ranking it just out of pure artistry, it would probably be number 2 or 3. But recently I've been thinking a lot about Vagabond again, and I went back and I read some of my favorite moments and chapters throughout the series. I reread the whole Inshin fight, I reread a bunch of the scenes with Matahachi, and I reread a lot of the current farm arc and the unfinished chapters. Funny thing is, I haven't read Vagabond in over a year, and no new chapters have dropped since then. There is sort of a last final chapter thing that was released, but I'll get to that momentarily. But I also realized I never did a kind of full retrospective review of Vagabond on the channel, and I thought now would be a good time to do it since the series is sort of on my mind once more. It's one of those series that never really leaves your thoughts, but when you start really thinking about it again, you really got to go back and reread some of those chapters. As well, I most recently read the Book of Five Rings, which was written by the actual Miyamoto Musashi, which I was going to do a review just on that book alone, but it was a very hard book to try to figure out how to review because a lot of it is just battle tactics in swordplay, and I'm not sure how to review that, although it was very informative. I know lots of ways to kill people now, but that's besides the point. Actually, it was a really good book, and if you're a fan of Vagabond or Miyamoto Musashi and his story at all, I would definitely recommend checking out the Book of Five Rings. But having said that, I want to talk a little bit about my full kind of overall retrospective of Vagabond as a series. Though incomplete, I definitely think you could call this series a masterpiece, and it follows the story of a man named Miyamoto Musashi, who was a real historical Japanese figure. Though the story is fictional and definitely takes a lot of liberties, it is kind of revolving around the story of somebody that actually existed and went on to write this book about swordsmanship and to kind of share his philosophies and pass them down to the next generations. But where did he come from? Where did he start? What was his journey to get from point A to point B? And the thing you have to remember and realize too is you have to put it into a historical context where in this point in kind of ancient feudal Japan, we have to remember that Musashi is a murderer. As much as we want to look at it with honor, dignity, and respect, we also have to acknowledge the fact that this man ended people's lives, and this man ended quite a lot of people's lives. And yes, he kind of does learn through those experiences and become a better man as time goes on, but I think that we definitely need to put ourselves into the mindset of the time where you could literally challenge somebody to a duel in the middle of the street and cut them down in front of a bunch of spectators. That is a very different world than what we live in now, and to be able to put yourself into that mindset might be a little bit difficult for some people to do, especially following and dealing with a character that was, like I said, a murderer. Now, lots of times in stories, we obviously have our main characters killing people. Berserk obviously has guts slashing a bunch of people up, and we don't seem to care that much, but the fact that Musashi was actually a real-life person kind of puts that a little bit more into perspective and makes it a little bit different than regular fictional stories. And Vagabond pulls no punches, showing the sort of wild thirst that is within Miyamoto Musashi, especially during his younger years, and how he wants to become the most powerful man under the sun. He wants to be invincible. He wants to prove that his strength is the best simply by going out and getting into different battles and challenging the strongest opponents that he can find. And it is within that very initial goal and setup that we start delving into the idea behind the philosophy of Vagabond, which is what does it mean to be invincible, and does it really matter in the end? And there are a lot of different ways that Vagabond tackles this issue in this question, dealing with older, wiser characters that try to teach Musashi as he goes about his journey. We have Takuhan, who teaches him that if you focus on a single tree, you miss the entire forest, meaning that if you're being too directly focused on something, that you miss the overall picture of what is actually going on. You have your own sort of narrow-minded viewpoint of particular things in front of you, and people like to put things in categories and boxes inside of their mind, whereas they don't look at things from a third-person perspective. They look at somebody from their specific point of view. So whether that's going into battle and whether that's going to be, I view you as an enemy no matter what, and not thinking about the person as, hey, this is somebody that has a mother, a father, perhaps brothers or sisters or children. You know, you're looking at something in a very direct, personal way that you kind of dehumanize somebody by doing this. Or you put them on too much of a pedestal, as it becomes with the character of Matahachi, which I'll get to in a moment. He also meets characters that tell him that invincible is just a word, and what does that possibly mean? And what it's getting at, without getting into too many spoilers, is that there really is no such thing as somebody out there that's invincible, because we are all human and we are all frail to particular things, and we might not be on our best game all the time. You might be at 100% where you could take anybody down, but someday you might be a little bit tired, you might be a little bit sluggish, you might be dealing with something going on in your personal life. There could be many factors at play to where you're not at 100%, and somebody else who you could best 6 days out of the week just happens to be at their 100% that day and could easily best you. Also, with the travels and the journey, if you want to be invincible, then there will constantly be opponents that you have to face. And the idea is that anybody out there could be a potential threat to your invincibility. So what would be the ultimate objective to prove that you're invincible? Well, you would have to be literally the last man standing on planet Earth. And if that's the case, then what does the rest of your life entail? If you've actually reached it that far, then who cares? There's nobody there to care that you're invincible. But even so, through most of the series, Musashi does have this deep inner darkness within him that is actually very reminiscent of the Beast of Darkness from Berserk, if you're a fan of that series. And the way that Vagabond showcases this is in a kind of sort of similar manner, where it doesn't particularly take the form of anything, but it does sort of speak to him, and we see these abstract drawings of the Musashi within Musashi, the one that constantly strives for fighting and battle and to prove that he's the best, the egoic sense within him. And as he goes through these different battles, though, besides just enacting this sort of beast within himself, he also actually does learn valuable lessons that he can apply towards real life things later on. One of my favorite moments is when he fights the monk Inshin. This is actually probably my favorite segment of the series to begin with, because primarily of the philosophies that it entails. And I don't want to give away too many spoilers, like I said, but it deals with the fact of Musashi going in full force, angry, fighting with his emotions and whatnot, while Inshin stays completely calm. And within that calm state, there is that superiority, and you can wear your opponent down by doing this. In most styles of martial arts, and probably swordsmanship as well, they really stress the idea of being calm and centered in oneself. And I often talk about the calm state that you experience when you're in a high kind of adrenaline situation. And this is something only some people have experienced, and maybe you have experienced it through martial arts and through fighting or boxing. If you've done any kind of combat sport, I'm sure you're aware of the calm state, but also if you are into just sports in general, if you get into that flow, or if you're kind of a madman like me that likes to go running into the woods with a machete, you eventually start to see things in basically slow motion. Things become much slower, you become much more hyper aware. And it's a very strange sensation that is very hard to talk about. Musashi does talk about it in the actual Book of Five Rings, and it is something that is mentioned throughout the Vagabond series as well. And it's sort of like being in a flow state where you're not thinking, you're not plagued by thoughts of the past or the future, you're completely present, things are slowed down, your senses are more hyper aware, and you are just in this state of absolute attentiveness to everything that's around you. And it's something that I definitely strive for in my life to experience again and again, because it's not something that just comes naturally. You don't just wake up and feel this way. Maybe some people can if you've gone through intense situations or meditations and whatnot. Perhaps some people have actually gotten to this level, but for me personally, this is something that I've only experienced a handful of times, and it is actually an incredible experience. And when I was reading the chapters that deal with the Musashi battle against Inshin, this is something that completely stood out to me and something that I resonated with, because I had felt this sort of calm state before. And perhaps also because me as a person, sometimes I do get a little bit agitated too easily. Perhaps I do get a little bit too down in the dumps and depressed. And when you're in that sort of low energy state, you don't necessarily feel this feeling because you're too bogged up in your head and you're not enough in tune with your body. There's also other philosophies that are taught to Musashi along the way. Perhaps one of the biggest ones is to learn that you are part of the entire universe experiencing itself at once. It's an all is one, one is all type of situation, and this kind of leads into the ideas of being comfortable with your own death. And I know this is something very difficult that a lot of people don't talk about and a lot of people don't want to think about, because our mortality frankly scares us, because we have this sort of egoic mind that thinks that we're going to go on forever, and it knows in the back of our head, we know that we're going to die at some point, but we don't focus on it. And there is a type of meditation, perhaps it has a name, I'm not really sure, but there is a type of meditation that is meant for you to reflect on the idea of your death and to be okay with it, not to hope for death in any way, but to understand that you are mortal, and at some point this part of you will die, but you will continue on in different form, because you will sink into the earth, become part of the earth, animals eat that, you become part of the animals. It's a cycle of life, and it's all one flowing thing that has a natural flow to it, just like waves coming in and out of the ocean, which is another thing that they allude to in Vagabond, becoming kind of like the ocean, like water, formless, shapeless, being whatever the universe needs you to be at one particular time. There's a lot of deep stuff that's actually going on in Vagabond, and maybe some people wouldn't find it too deep, or maybe they find it fake deep. I don't really know what people think about it, but for me, I definitely appreciated Vagabond for sharing these ideas and themes and philosophies through its story. And that's one thing I definitely have to say about Vagabond, is that from a character point of view, it focuses heavily on, I would say, three main characters. I would say Musashi, Matahachi, and Kojiro. Other than that, there are a bunch of side characters that are coming in and out of the story, but Vagabond really uses its characters as a vessel to share these ideas and philosophies through them. And I'm not saying that the characters aren't good, and I'm not saying that the characters aren't explored. They definitely are, but I feel like every single segment of this series uses these particular characters in order to get that message across. So I know it's kind of strange to say a story about a man's life isn't necessarily a character-driven story, but an idea-driven story, but I truly believe it is. And that also leads me into the next character, which is Matahachi. And Matahachi is probably my favorite character in Vagabond, and a lot of people that I've seen, and I haven't looked too much up into like Vagabond forums online or anything like that, but what I've seen a lot is that a lot of people seem to hate Matahachi, and he seems to be a character that's set up in a way to where, yeah, a lot of the decisions he makes are horrible. He keeps kind of screwing himself and other people over. He keeps making bad decisions. He keeps getting drunk. He keeps lying and lying and lying. And you look at this character and you see this weakness within him. But that's the thing, is that Matahachi is supposed to represent that weak side of masculinity, I feel like. I feel like him and Musashi are kind of two sides of the same coin that go upon different routes of life. They start out in the very first volume, not a spoiler, they start out together in the very first volume and then go their separate ways. And they both kind of go down a dark path, but in a very different way. Say Matahachi is the guy, and I feel like a lot of people hate him, because a lot of people see themselves in Matahachi, but don't want to admit it. See, when we read a story about a badass character with a samurai sword going around defeating people, we want to envision ourselves as Musashi. We want to be this badass character. We want to be this guy that learns these philosophies and great lessons in life. We want to be this guy that goes on scaling the tallest mountains. But I think what a lot of people are scared to realize about themselves is we're a lot like Matahachi in many ways. And maybe I'm just going to single myself out here, but I feel like something that I've felt in my life many, many times is this idea of weakness. Whether it be physical weakness, emotional weakness, or spiritual weakness, there's a lot of times in life where I've had to admit to myself that in this particular area, I am weak. But that doesn't mean that I can't get better as things move forward. But I think that admission of weakness is something that some people are very, very afraid to do. And Matahachi sort of represents that idea of somebody that is afraid to admit his own weakness to the world. He'll admit it to himself and be down on himself, and he'll just wind up getting drunker and telling more lies, screwing more things up. But how many people have you seen do this in real life? Or how many times in your life have you screwed something up because you feel low about yourself, but you don't admit it to the world? You kind of keep it locked in, beating yourself up more, bringing your own energy down while you screw up the world around you. And I think that's a very scary, harsh realization, because a lot of people don't like to look in the mirror and admit their faults and admit their weaknesses. So, and maybe this is a stretch, I'm not sure, but I feel like Matahachi's storyline throughout this entire manga was this idea of people that can't necessarily admit their weakness right away, and how life gets screwed up when you can't do that. But once you do accept that you are weak in particular areas, then you can begin to heal. Then you can begin to get stronger. But you can't get stronger if you ignore your faults along the way. So for me, Matahachi was one of the best characters in the entire manga. I think my favorite character because, one, there is a relatability to him, and then two, I believe that his process of understanding and recognizing the problems that he had was, in a way, one of the most profound things about the entire manga. Now, the third main character that we deal with here is Kojiro. And about a third of the way into the manga, we take a break from the Musashi story and we move into this Kojiro story. But Kojiro definitely represents the idea of this kind of flow state that I was talking about before. He is very much like the ocean. He's very much like water. He is fluid. He can become any shape, any form. He adapts to situations very quickly. And he sort of is this embodiment of going with the flow of the universe. But we deal with the kind of parallel lives between Kojiro and Musashi and the things that they go through, knowing that they sort of interweave and interlock as the story goes on. And in fact, I think the story of Kojiro and his upbringing and his childhood and everything was actually one of the most wholesome and fun things to read about this series. And I was very shocked when we decided to take a great departure from Musashi in order to talk about Kojiro. But after reading it, I have to say it's probably one of the best moments of the entire manga. On top of everything that I've discussed so far, on top of these characters, on top of the philosophies within, on top of everything that the story talks about, we also have some of the best artwork in manga in general. Vagabond has incredible, jaw-dropping, amazing double-page spreads of mountainscapes, of the forest areas, of rivers and oceans and beaches, and just kind of the downtown streets of Japan at the time, along with each character design being very unique and specific and different, and them actually looking like real people. Like they don't look like manga characters, they look like people that Inoue is probably painting a reference off somebody. If you're very much into kind of the aesthetics of things, I will say that the artwork is a huge selling point when it comes to Vagabond, and it is something that you will hear people talk about quite often, and rightfully so. But then we have to get to the downside of the manga, and the downside of the manga is that Vagabond is likely to be unfinished. There has not been a new chapter for several years, and the story is currently building towards a big final confrontation between a couple of characters, and it is likely that we will never get that. It seems that the manga of the series has moved on and started another series that I hear is really good, but has nothing to do with samurais or feudal Japan at all, or anything Vagabond. There's a chance that he just sort of got burned out on doing this series. And if you're talking about the artwork, like I mentioned before, I can imagine how long it must take to make a single chapter of Vagabond, because oh my god, this artwork is crazy. Having said that though, it is very rough to be a Vagabond fan and reaching that final chapter, because this series is probably never going to complete, and we will never get that final confrontation that we want. Now, recently it has been brought to my attention that there is a final chapter of Vagabond that skips everything going on in the current arc and goes right to an absolute finale of Musashi as an old man that is out right now. I did not get around to reading this yet, but I plan to very soon, and I do plan to make a video specifically on the final chapter, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. Also, I do plan to make more videos on Vagabond going forward. I actually want to expand talking about these particular areas of philosophies and lessons that are brought through the Vagabond story, and dedicate specific videos to those lessons. I think kind of longer talks about specific scenes would do better into kind of conveying what at least I got out of the series. Not saying I'm the most knowledgeable guy when it comes to Vagabond. I'm sure there's a lot of people that know a lot more about this series and the actual history of Musashi than I do. That's for goddamn sure. But at least I can share sort of my opinions and ideas about what I got out of particular scenes. Like I said, the whole chapter's with Insha, and I really want to share ideas about that with you guys. I want to talk about Kojiro, I want to talk about Matahachi, and I do want to touch on the farm arc a little bit as well. So hopefully those videos will be coming in the very near future. I'm sorry I kind of dropped the Vagabond content for a while. I apologize about that, but I hope I can make it up to you guys if those were something you were looking forward to and enjoyed seeing. Anyway, let me know what you think about Vagabond as a whole down in the comments below. What are your favorite things about this series? What's the best lesson that you got out of Vagabond? And who is your favorite character? Put all that in the comments below, or anything else you want to talk about Vagabond related. I thank you a lot for watching this video, guys. I really do appreciate it. Please give it a like if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment, because any kind of interaction with the video does help out in the algorithm. Subscribe if you want to stick around and see some more reviews. Check the links in the description for the Patreon if you want to support the channel on that deeper level. Twitter, Instagram links, Discord, all that down below. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you next time.